Good morning, church. My name is Kyle Eastman, and this is home for me. If you don't know me, my wife and I were here for 15 years, and we served the church for pretty much that whole time. And we got married here. We had our first two kids here. We've had another since. We have a third, which I'll tell you a little bit about. I have the opportunity, the honor of preaching almost every Sunday now, which some people love, and some people are like, that's a lot. That's a lot of pop. And I'm almost never nervous, but I'm a little shaky right now. And if you're like, don't know me, you've never seen me before, you're like, why are you shaky? It's because I feel like I'm coming home. I feel like I'm back home. And a couple things I noticed when I came in was, one is that if you haven't been here long and you're amazed by how much room there is in between the pews, it wasn't always that way. Just imagine right now. What's up? I love you guys. They haven't hugged you yet. Just imagine right now there was another pew in between the two. And you're going to feel claustrophobic the rest of the time just thinking about it. Some people endured that for like 50 years. Be grateful for the work done before you. Where's Randy? Are these the same lights? Yes. I am amazed those are still operational. The reason I'm amazed is because I remember we put them up. I think it was a week before COVID. That week. We had our first Wednesday night light for the church. It was bring it to the church. And we were like, let's do it. We're going to turn the lights off. We're going to put these lights up. And I was up there and we were putting them up and I was like, this is bad construction. And I was like, I should ask Randy for help. But here's the thing. When you ask Randy for help, what you're really doing is just telling him to do it. So that's what I would do. But hey, can you help me with this? And basically I was just like, hey, you got it, bro. It's fine. But I was a part of what happened up there, and I'm not going to lie to you. It's an act of God. These things have not fallen down. But they haven't fallen down yet, so don't be nervous now. I'm just grateful they're still there. I hear that there are new elders in the church. John, Jeannie, Randy, and Betsy are very dear to me. And I actually really tried to make it for the service, but I just could not do it. But man, I see you, Randy. Where's John? John, did you still come to church? He's like, I'm out. This is too much. I just want to say, Randy and Betsy and John and Jeannie's here too, that I'm just really proud of you guys. That's a lifetime achievement, and one that very few people deserve the honor of. And I feel that you four do deserve that honor. And so I'm grateful to be able to be here just in the aftermath of it. The title of today's sermon is The Language of Love. And I didn't know that was still up there. This might be my old PowerPoint, which means it's going to be an interesting morning because I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's up here. So we're just going to figure it out together. I didn't know this was on here, but this is Kristen and I when we were dating. That's my wife. She would have loved to be here. The reason I'm here at all is because my sister-in-law's wedding was yesterday in West Palm. And it was kind of a crazy affair. We did it. It was great. It got rained out it was on the beach. And we're on the beach, and I'm doing the ceremony, and it starts raining. And she's talking to her fiance, and I'm talking to everybody else, and I'm like, I don't know what to do. And it looks really blue behind me, but the way I'm looking, have you guys seen the movie Independence Day? Yeah. When the alien ship comes through, it's this cloud of darkness. That's what it looked like. And so the whole time I was like, dearly beloved. Oh, God, it's going to be bad. And she was whispering to her husband's name now is Clayton. She was like, Clayton, I'm going to call it off. He was like, you're going to call it off? While I'm doing the ceremony. And what she meant was we're going to move it to the backup location. But he was like, whoa, what do you mean? You're going to call it off now? We had to move it. It was crazy. They got married, but I went to bed at 1 a.m. and I woke up at 5:30 and I drove here. 4 hours. But that's what you do for family, right? It's family, man. I moved around a lot growing up. We bounced around a ton. California, Canada, Chicago, Orlando, Gainesville. So when people would ask me, oh, where are you from? So usually they got one of two answers. One was an annoyingly long-winded and irritatingly confusing answer. Or one was just a non-answer. And people were offended by my unwillingness to engage. Oh, where are you from? I'm like, they don't want those stories. And they're like, all right. What's wrong with you? But now, since I've moved, I just tell them my home is Gainesville. And it's very simple like that. And it's cool to feel like you have a home, and perhaps people are confused why I love it so much. She's like, oh, Florida, cool, because I'm in Michigan now. They're like, oh, are you right by the beach? I was like, no. I'm further from the beach here than I'm in Michigan. Like, oh, boy, you should probably go to Disney all the time, right? I was like, I haven't been to Disney in 20 years. Does it have a really cool downtown? It does not. What's the area like across the street from the university? Pretty grungy. Why do you love it? The people. The same reason you love any place. It's the people, right? I love it. I miss you guys. I think about you constantly. Our family's doing really well. Yeah, this is the old one, so I don't know why this one went through, but here you go. I'll do my best. This is actually an old picture, which means you won't see one of my newest edition. I don't know why I didn't go through, but here you go. That's Rowan and Kate. That's our little logo for our little church. This is like a little church. We'll be a church of 60 people. We have a great time together. Rowan is 6 now. This is like 2 years ago, so this is very outdated. So this isn't current. You'd be like, oh, they haven't aged, because they literally have it in that picture. They're doing great. Rowan's in kindergarten. He loves Pokemon, which some parents are like, it's too young, and I'm like, it's happened. Like, it's done. Like, you can't take it away. Let it be. We'll work through the dysfunction that it may cause. He's confident, he's funny, he's competent, he's a great kid. Kate, Kathleen is turning 4 in 2 months, and she's our little spicy girl. Oh, yeah? She's still spicy. So if you remember her before, she's probably the girl that you're like, hi, and she's like, no, like, I'm not. Like, when you've earned it, I'll give it, you know? So we're working with her. She's doing great. She's in preschool. And then Noelle, who there's no picture of, I'll get to that. Noelle is 6 months old. And it's been a wild ride. Before we had kids, people were like, oh, do you want kids? I'm like, 100% I want kids. Do you want 2? After we had Rowan, they're like, do you want another one? I'm like, 100%. And after Kate, they're like, do you want another one? I was like, oh, man. It's 30%. Like, it depends on what Kristen wants. And then we had our third. They're like, people are like, do you want kids? 0%. I do not want it. I love my children. I have no more children love to give. But if God said, here's another one, then I would find the love within me. But I don't want another one. She's a delight. She's doing great. She's a fighter. She's pushed us to places we didn't know we could go, and kids do that. I've had moments of sleep deprivation and desperation that I've never felt before with our third. So what to preach when you come home? Turn to John 13. This is Sermon on the Mount. As you're turning there, this is my wife, for those of you who don't know her. If it's even possible, she's even more beautiful and lovely than she was before. She's doing great. She's an amazing mom. She wishes she could be here. But this is kind of my vacation, honestly. Yesterday was a crazy day. I had the kids all day. And if you're like a dad, you're not used to having a lot of you aren't used to having the kids all day. And it was like 3 of them. And it was just like, it was wild. Like, I can't believe the house didn't burn down. You know what I mean? Because there are times when I'm with Noelle, like feeding her this bottle, and I'm like, Rowan and Kate, just stay alive. Like, I'll be back in 20 minutes-ish. Just stay in this area. You have my number. Like, just, get a hold of me if you need anything. That's where it's at now. It's crazy. Kristen's amazing. She's doing great. She wishes she could be here. It's a little too much. The last 2 years have been pretty wild. They've been really crazy. And John 13 has taken on new meaning, which is interesting because in the passage, it's a very familiar passage. We'll read it together in a moment. John 13, we're going to start in verse 34. Super famous verse, right? Like, Jesus talking about love, and it's the beautiful thing about the Bible is that it's alive and well, and the meanings grow as you grow. You learn new things about the Bible depending on what you're going through, right? This is just a thing. Like, if you love your Bible and you're in it every day, you feel this with scriptures you've read many times. And I've this last 2 years experienced this. What do you say about the last 2 years? The one thing that's become crystal clear to me, because a lot of things are less clear. Some things have become like, oh, I get this now. Some things are like, I'm more confused than I was 10 years ago. Like, it feels like that's the way my life goes. Some things I'm like, oh, I was so certain about this before, and now I really don't know what I think about that. And then some things have become much more clear to me. And the number one thing is that what is meant to separate the follower of Jesus is the way we love people. I know this because Jesus told it to us. It's a very clear statement. Consider John 13. This is all old. All right, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to turn the PowerPoint off. It is now dead to me. And I'm going to go old school. Jesus didn't have a PowerPoint either, all right? You don't need one. John 13, starting in verse 34. It says, "A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another." Pretty common. We've read it many times before, as we should. You should read it many more times in your life. One thing that I'll just go ahead and leave this up here. Something I've learned about the church and the way people come to faith is that some people stumble upon faith. Some of you have a story where you're like, no one reached out to me. I just started reading my Bible one day, and Jesus spoke to me in a dream, and here I am. And I'm like, that's great. I used to be skeptical about that stuff, and I'm like, I don't even care. Like, God's crazy. Like, he does so many wild things. Great, you had a dream. Like, you found a note in your shoe, and Jesus was like, go to Campusview. I'm like, great, I don't know. I don't even know. I'm like, I don't care as long as you're here. Some people are persuaded into belief, but it's rare. Like, it is the rare person that comes skeptical and is willing to be persuaded. But it does happen. It's hard because the kind of people that need to be persuaded are skeptical, and those people are generally harder and less willing to hear. It's hard to combine skepticism with humility, which is what you need to be persuaded. Most often, though, people that come to faith are loved into belief. And that was certainly the way Jesus approached his ministry. He loved people into belief. And if the church can learn or can grow in the language of love that Jesus offers, as opposed to the language of love that the world endorses, that's when the church works. Like, that's when it makes sense. Even when church is so messy. Like, when you first come into church, you're like, dude, this place is just, I think it was said earlier in the welcome, no one does anything wrong. Like, it's just so great. Like, and then you're in for like 2 weeks, and you're like, I don't know about this place. Like, I feel like, it looked so good, but that guy he did me wrong. He said that thing, and I was like, maybe this isn't the church of God. And if you find the church of God, you shouldn't go if it requires perfect people. You're going to mess it up. The church is super messy. And no one should claim that we're doing everything right. But Jesus didn't say we had to do everything right. He said you just need to love people well. It's not even the church's job. Think about this. It's not even the church's job to get all of its doctrine perfect. We do our best. Jesus never says to do that. He says, watch it closely, be wise, work toward it, do your best, be humble theologically, but love well. Because you're going to get stuff wrong, but you can still love people. That's important for the critics of the church, right? We can be very critical of the church and forget what the church is actually about. The question of the day is, how well do you love? In John 13, verse 1, it says, it was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. This is interesting, this phraseology. Having loved his own, the disciples, he loved them to the end. It's interesting. Perhaps your Bible says something else. Some of your Bibles may say he loved them to the full extent. And that's what this means. That in Jesus' mind, this is his last night, right? John 13 through about 17, really John 13 through John 20, is like one day. And it's what he's telling his disciples. And it says, Jesus was thinking, what's the best way I can express my love to these people I love so much? To wash their feet. Now, I don't know about you, but there's a part of me that's like, was that the best way, though? Like, that was number one. Number one. Why was that number one? Why was it that God in the flesh said, this is the best thing I can do for you right now, to teach you how to love people? And that's what we're going to talk about today. Why was this the best way? Of course, it's not just literal. Like, if you came in and Tyler was like washing everyone's feet, he'd be like, I pass, man. Like, this is a weird church. Like, I don't want to be here. Like, I'm very insecure about the smell of my feet. Like, I don't want to expose that to the world, Like, obviously this is not just literal, it's metaphor. And what is it metaphor for? Something about washing their feet was an indication of the fullest extent of the love of God. What do we learn from that? Here's the first thing we learn, is that Jesus assumed the posture and place of the household servant in that space. What do I mean? It was customary upon arrival at particularly someone of a higher social class that the lowliest servant of the household would wash the guests upon arrival, usually a Gentile. In fact, the act was considered so degrading that even the lowliest Jewish servant was not allowed to do it. It was only if you had a Gentile servant. Now, I assume that wasn't always the case, but generally speaking, that was kind of the rule of thumb. So you knew this was the dirty job. You didn't even want to disgrace your servant with it unless they were a Gentile, which is a whole other conversation about how God probably felt about that. Probably a certain way. Feet were gross. And you've probably heard this before if you've been to church. So I'm not going to go on and on, but it's not like you had your Brooks on, you know what I mean? And your nice athletic socks. It was like the sandals, and it's dirty. It's not this nice concrete. And speaking of nice floors, my school floor is looking nice. Sorry, I walked in, I was noticing the rental. I also noticed that the carpet is still going strong, which I'm pumped about. And the stage looks the same size as it did before, doing a great job making it work. Got the new set. Sorry, I'm just kind of also here, figuring it out as I'm here. I'm excited about the stage. But yeah, it's not like this, look, I don't even know hardwood. I don't know if it's real. I don't know if it's fake. Who cares? It's not nice floor they're walking around with in Judea. Right. It's gross. And it wouldn't have been uncommon for people to just get used to having cuts on their feet. Have you ever run around barefoot on rocks? Because you're not let's do that again. That was great. You know what I mean? You don't want to do that again. It was a gross job. It was probably a messy job with blood and dirt. Not good. You didn't want that job. Think about the metaphor now. It grows as you understand context somewhat, right? This is kind of a dirty job. Maybe this is a lower job. It does require humility. Here's the thing about our world, is that in our world, when you say love, it's very cheap. It's very cheap. There's a song, my favorite artist is still my favorite artist. His name's Ben Rector. And he has a song, and he says this about love. He says, there are way too many love songs. Can I get an amen? Right? I think they've got it all wrong. Life is not the mountaintops, it's the walking in between. I like you walking next to me. Of course, the idea is that love, so many of these songs, so much pop culture talks about how love is the moment you meet, or the first kiss, or this epic moment early in the relationship. But love is not really like that, though. That's usually something else, and then we're going to talk about that's the world's version of love. That's something else. Love is in between. It's not necessarily the mountaintops or the valleys, it's all the space in between, which is most of the space in your life. That's where love is proven or disproven. For those of you familiar with Disney, The Little Mermaid is a great example of the way the world thinks about love. Ariel, or Ariel, if you're from here, is a mermaid. For those of you who don't have context for Little Mermaid, I'm just going to give you the spark notes. There's a mermaid, she falls in love with the guy who has legs, and they end up happily ever after, and we're pumped about it. She falls in love with him. She gets kind of in a pickle because she gets mixed up with a bad sort, giant octopus witch lady. She makes a bad deal because she's naive and because she's infatuated. She's actually not in love. She's made a very bad decision. She says, let's do this deal. You can have my voice until the 3 days goes up. And Ursula's like, you have to make this guy fall in love with you. And you know how she tells her to make him fall in love with her? Body language. You got it right there. Yeah. She's indicating in this. So if I'm marring this movie for you, just wait till I get on about Lion King, right? I'm just kidding. I don't have any problem with Lion King. She's use your body. Use your sensuality. You don't need your voice. That's not what he cares about. And you're kind of that part in the movie happens. You're oh, I'm glad my son doesn't get that yet. Which happens a lot in Disney movies, actually. You're kind of man, should my kids watch this? I'm yeah, I'm going to let it go. We'll work with it when we get there. It works. Eric falls in love with her. Great. I don't know how the sequel goes. Usually there's some kind of dysfunction in the Disney sequel, right? Like in life. Why? Because this is actually not unlike kind of the way the world is. We confuse love and infatuation all the time. Why is that? Because it all starts with attraction. Attraction is not wrong. It's when you're intrigued, when you're drawn to something or to someone. You can be attracted to a person, a thing, an idea. It doesn't have to be sexual. It often is. But often it's not. You can just be drawn to someone as a friend. Right? That's attraction. Attraction, we over-sexualize everything, but it's not meant to be that way. It's when you're drawn to something. I think about the first time I felt drawn to Kristen. It was her personality. It was her wit. It was her spirituality. It was her emotional intelligence. It was her beauty. Those things, I was drawn to her. Once attraction is born, it's fun, it's good. It's healthy, even. But what's the next step? That's the key. What is the next step that you take? Because at this point, the path diverges. And it can go a couple ways. I probably, this is not exhaustive. Maybe there's a third road. If you're like, I think there's a third. I'm like, whatever, there's a third then. I'm going to tell you two. One of the roads that attraction leads to is infatuation. The other road is selfless love. The difference between them, which way you go, all depends on how hungry you are. Let me tell you what I mean. If you see a fruit tree, and I had a beautiful picture of a fruit tree up there. It wasn't really a fruit tree, it was just a big tree. Betsy might find it anyway, that's what she does. So just picture for a second, you haven't eaten in 3 days. Brad, you're like really connected. You're like, dude, yeah, like that sounds horrible. Yeah. You haven't eaten in 3 days. You're so hungry. You haven't had anything to drink in 3 days. You might be dead. Assuming you're not dead, you're so thirsty. And you're in the desert. I don't know how you got there, but you're like in the desert, and it's like all those movies where yeah, there it is. It's not really a fruit tree. It's the closest I could get. If you look up, show me a great fruit tree, all the pictures stink on Google. Don't even do it. Like, just find this one. Pretend that's filled with all your favorite foods, even if it makes no sense. It's like chocolate ice cream, great. It's dripping from the trunk. Like, I don't care. Whatever makes you feel like pumped. You're walking through the desert, and you walk up on this tree. How you look at that tree is totally dependent on how hungry you are. If you're starving because you haven't eaten, you're ravenous. You want to consume that tree. You can't even appreciate the beauty of the tree because you're so hungry. Like, I'm just going to eat this thing. Like, I'm going to drink all this water. I'm not even going to look at the beauty. It's kind of like when you watch those cooking shows and you're like, this is a very sophisticated dish. You're like, stop it. Like, you sound ridiculous. Just eat it. You know what I mean? Only people that are full talk about how pretty it looks. It's gone so fast, I don't even have time. Right. And this happens to us spiritually, because if you walk on this fruit tree but you're well fed, like in a botanical garden on a date perhaps, you walk up to it and you're like, oh, that's so beautiful. I have no desire to eat that because I'm full, but I can appreciate it. I can actually enjoy what God made. Right. This actually happens in our lives, spiritually. Infatuation happens when you're hungry because there's parts of your life not filled up with God. You're not full. You're starving. God is not filling you up. And you desire something to fill you up. And I would say more often than not, this is most applicable in romantic relationships. It's amazing how often we see in the world, in the church, whatever, when those first steps to when you're attracted, how often people run into the relationship because they're hungry. And the people will ask me, how do I know when I'm ready to date? And dating, of course, is a very complicated thing. Like, and you could criticize the Bible. The Bible is not clear. Like, the Bible's not clear on a lot of things. Should we still do it? Like, no. Like, we incorporate wisdom into our lives, of course. We run into relationships because we're hungry, because we're not filled up with God. And so people ask me, when do I know I'm ready to date? When you're not so eager to date, talk to me again. Because I'd be afraid to be dating you. Because I'd be afraid of the expectations you put on me. I'd be afraid of what would happen when I let you down, which is inevitable. And I'm afraid of the people that don't listen to the advice. Nobody talked to me, by the way. If someone's like, oh, this is exactly where I am, like, I don't know, like, someone's always here. And this applies to more than just a relationship, right? We run into things because we're hungry, because God is, in fact, not enough. This is why infatuation always leads to heartache and to disillusionment. Because relationships begun this way can never really experience love, because you're stuck in infatuation. A rare few can come out of it, but only with a great deal of humility, which you probably don't have because you got into it in the first place. So you might be stuck. You might have to learn the hard way. God can work with that too. Some of us have had to learn the hard way. When you go to people or things hungry, it always ends in tragedy. Good things become ultimate things, but God's the only one that's meant to be the ultimate thing. Right. We can't let good things become ultimate things. Love is not a feeling of attraction. It's a choice to serve, which is what Jesus is telling you. It's not a feeling, it's a choice. Love is when, out of the fullness of your heart, you serve other people despite their attractiveness, whether they are or not. The language of love is not about how can you give to me, It's always, how can I give to you? This is, of course, a great disposition to have towards the church. Not like, I didn't like the whatever this morning. You're like, is that why you're here? Like, we're worshiping together, which was phenomenal, by the way. It was excellent. I wish I could sing Wade in the Water like you. Hit the next octave. I'm like, I don't have that one. Like, that's not an octave I possess. No, the singing's great. And I don't really know if I noticed, but the sound does bounce. I was here for like 10 years, and I'm like, oh, yeah, it really does bounce. Because the place we're in does not bounce. It dies in the air. No acoustic power. Why are you here? Is it because you're filled up and you're giving away, or because you're hungry and you're not finding what you want? Because if you're hungry, the church will never satisfy you. It just won't. Only when you're filled up with God can you actually learn to love other people without idolatry, which is key. Because when there's idolatry and God's not ultimate, other things become ultimate and ruin your life. Because that's what sin does. That's why love is not a feeling you have, it's a choice you make. It's so interesting to me. Perhaps we've all been here. I've said this for many years. When people tell me, I just don't feel connected to God. I don't like this point. Why? Because it assumes that I need to feel connected to God to love Him. Or that I need to feel connected to people to love them. I'm so grateful my wife doesn't feel that way about me. She's like, man, I just don't feel connected today. I'm going to not love you. I'm like, let me know when it comes back, because I really would appreciate that, But we can have this with our relationship with God. Here's the thing, the trick though, feelings generally follow choice. It usually is not the other way around if it's healthy. Sometimes feelings come first, but that often leads to the wrong kind of feeling. So when you think, I don't feel connected to God, how's your obedience? Because I find they often go hand in hand. Not always, but often. When people are like, I just don't feel connected. I'm like, do you feel like you're obedient? Wow. How do I even answer that question? So metaphysical. I'm like, no, it's not. Like, do it. You know what I mean? It's not metaphysical at all. Like, don't get psychology on me. Just do it. Feelings often follow choice. And in fact, the idea of the commands of God, if you start to feel like, it's hard for me to obey the commands because they feel like rules, you have a misconception of the point of commands. Commands from God are just pathways to promises. That's all they are. What does Jesus say in Matthew 11? Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I'll give you rest. Come to me is a command. I will give you rest is a promise. What you'll find once you kind of unlock that key, it's all over the gospel. Constantly, Jesus gives a command followed by a promise. And I think when we forget that following his commands is just a way to receive the promise, we start to feel like we start to come to church out of compliance. We obey out of compliance rather than heartfelt worship. And that will almost always lead to bitterness. Because you feel like, God's he's not putting out for me. It becomes very transactional, our relationships. I do this so I get back, but that's not how it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be God gave you everything, and so you give back because you're grateful for the gift of grace. But we get really mixed up about this. I know I do. It wasn't just that he served, it was how he served. Jesus was amazing in this way. It was where he served. Think about what Jesus did. He gets down, he does this thing that only the lowliest household servant's been doing, but he's also telling them, I'm God. They're very confused, these poor disciples. You read the story, you're like, how did that happen then? Because they don't understand. They have no category in their brains for how this man who is God could also be doing this thing. They had to learn that category. Jesus displayed his love by intentionally washing the dirtiest part of these people. He found the dirtiest part, the worst job, and he always did this. You read about Jesus, he always was the first in line. I have a story I want to relate to you. About 8 months ago, last summer, we were on the way home from a birthday party, which are fun things, for my daughter's friend. So it was kind of like, she felt like it was her birthday party. And she hadn't eaten well that day. The party started at 10:30, and there was a lot of cake. She refused breakfast. I conceded. Bad move in hindsight, but we all make mistakes. And I was like, whatever, I don't care, we're just going to go. So we go, it's like a 40-minute drive, it's pretty hot outside, we're on the way back, and all she's eaten is cake. And a little bit of milk, which didn't help. Dairy on dairy is always a bad choice. So just a disclaimer. This is a little gross, but I'm gonna dial it back for the squeamish amongst you. But the thing is, if you're offended by it, you're gonna have to talk to Randy because I'm leaving tomorrow. So it's just the way it goes. So I start to hear kind of a sound, which as a parent in the middle of nowhere, nothing is more horrifying. then thinking for a moment, it's possible my daughter could throw up. And then you're just like, but what will I do? And then you just don't. Is there anything? And you're just praying. You can't stop. That's not safe. And Rowan even sees it coming. He's sitting next to her, and he's like, Dad, you got to do something, man. And I'm like, dude, we're just going to pray. And then the lesson was sometimes God says no. Because she indeed threw up. And it was as gross as you're imagining. So I pull over, middle of nowhere, not safe. I pull over, and we're like, there's this old farm that looks like it was in operation in the 1800s and hasn't been since then. And my wife and my at the time, 2 kids, I put a picnic blanket out, I gave them some snack stuff, and I was like, I'll be back. Because she can't sit in this seat. It's disgusting. But before I got her out of the seat, car seats don't offer a lot of there's not a lot of movement. It didn't go out the window or in a bag and all over her. And so I had a choice to make when I was taking her out of her seat. You ever taken a kid out of a car seat? It's like rocket science. The only way to get her out, I was like, I have 2 options. I can dish this off to Kristen and she'll do it. Oh, hon, I just got to check the tire. The pressure looked low. Can you just get her out? Or I could do it. You know how? And I did it. I just stuck my hands in there. I'm sorry, Katie. That's gross. So gross. And I won't. But and I took her out, and now the dirt, and it was on me. There's no way to avoid it. And I had a moment where I was like, do I love my sweet little girl? So I took her out. I'm gross. The car seat's gross. I take her across the street. And you know when you have to stop, you go to the restroom on the way somewhere, and you stop at a gas station, you're like, just please, God, let this not be like what I'm afraid it's going to be. And you walk in, you're like, it's exactly what I feared. In fact, it's worse. That's what happened. I walked in, there's this tiny little stall. It's really dirty. There's a light out. It looked like someone had gotten into a fight in there. I'm like, what happened in here? And I'm washing her seat. I don't have anything. I'm using napkins and the water from the sink. That's tiny and it's got really low water pressure. Another dude walks in. He's like, oh, sorry. And I was like, just one of those days. He was like, can I go? I was like, but you have to right now though. Can you wait? And he went, and it was rough. It was rough for a little bit in there. And I remember thinking, I was there, and I was thinking I think this is what love is. I think this is what Jesus meant. It's the greatest proof of love is not how you feel. It's how you sacrifice. If you want to prove you love, sacrifice is always the proof or the lack of proof. Don't tell me you love God if you do not sacrifice to be a disciple. Don't tell me you love the church if you're not willing to wade through the mess of the church to help the church become better. You can't tell me you love me if you're only there when I'm happy and making jokes. You got to love me when it's hard for you. You understand what I'm talking about? Jesus was like, this is hard for me. And then, of course, he went to the cross. The greatest expression of love. Jesus avoided nothing. When the going got tough, he leaned into the going. When it got dirty, he was the first in the mud. When the price went up, he would pay it with interest. First in the battle, last one out. The question, of course, is do you love like this? Do you love like this? Do we love like this? I don't have time for a lot of this last part. I just want to give a quick thought. Jesus says, I don't know if you noticed this, he says, a new command I give you. Love one another. You know, for a long time I was very confused by that. You ever read something in the Bible like, oh, I'm confused by that, and I don't feel like figuring it out. It's fine. I'm sure what he meant was fine. You know what I mean? And so you just move on. I actually decided, after 10 years, I was like, what does he mean? This isn't the first time he's told us to love people. This is, loving people is all over the Torah. You know what I mean? Moses talks about it. This isn't the first time it's even mentioned here. What does he mean, a new command? What he means, the word means, this is a new way to think about it. This is refreshing. A way you've never seen it before. It implies not actual, this is brand new. It implies freshness. Oh, we've never seen it like this before. That's what he meant. It was novel. If you're a basketball fan, it's kind of like when Steph Curry, 10 years ago, went on his rampage and he was hitting threes from everywhere. As a basketball fan, you're like, oh, I've seen people hit threes before. I've just never seen it like this. And so everybody was talking about it all the time. That's the way that they felt about what Jesus was doing. They're like, oh, I've heard of this. I've heard of love. I've never seen it like this. That's what when he says, all people will know you're my disciples if you love one another, That's how people are supposed to feel. Oh, of course, it's not like the church is the only place that loves. That's absurd. Of course people love. But on the scale and the depth that it should happen, people should be like, I've never seen this before. I've never been called to live like this before. This is intense. Am I ready to do this? Because we should always be asking ourselves, how can I love God more? When people hurt you, your instinct should be, how can I love them better? That's tough. When people are ignoring you on the text, and you know they read it because you saw the thing, perhaps there's a way I can love them better. Is that your instinct? It was Jesus's. When someone has hurt your friend or your spouse, how can I love them better? When the church is critiqued, or I feel like critiquing it, how can we show love better? We have to learn or continue to grow in speaking the language of love and discern when it's actually the language of hunger. And I would say that's especially important for those of you who are younger in the faith. Hunger and selfless love, man, they look so similar, but the result is so different. So are you filled up enough to love other people? Is God satisfying you, as the psalm says, as with the richest of foods? That's what he says. Like the best food you've ever eaten. Is that how he satisfies you? The lesson, of course, today is not on how to be satisfied through him, except the point of obedience will lead to love, because it's our truest expression of love. That's another sermon. This is more about what does it look like when you do, or when you're not. Are you the kind of person who just sticks their hand in the filth? A lot of you are these people. I know, because I know so many of you. Like, I have experienced the love of this church. So this isn't like Jared told me, like, come on, like, you guys stink, It's not like that. It's more like, just keep doing better. Like, you can always learn to love better. Like, you'll never be at a point where, like, I'm perfect at love. And then someone's going to be like, I feel like that wasn't loving, though. Like, all right, well, I'm close. You can always get closer to Jesus, even if you can't get there, and that's the idea, right? Just keep getting closer. Man, I love this church so much. I'm so happy to be here. Hopefully it's not 2 years before I come back. But the family's good. You guys seem like you're doing great. It's great to see you. I love you. Perhaps I can close with a prayer, and then I think there's one more song. All right, let's pray. Father God, we love you, and it's obviously, for me, like a really special moment. Thank you for allowing me to be here, just for the honor of speaking. It's always a privilege. Thank you for this incredible church. Thank you for the way that people have loved me in this church, the way you're working in this church. God, I pray that you would help us all to learn to love you better. Whatever that looks like. Maybe it looks like we're increasingly humble. Maybe it looks like we're increasingly sacrificial. I don't know. I just pray that you'd help us to do it better, because we do love you and want to honor you. Your son's name we pray. Amen.